Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I am Nancy Nager, and as president of the Boston Club, it is my very, very great pleasure to have you with us this morning to celebrate our annual corporate salute. Thank you all for being here, and when I say all, I mean 600 of you. Thank you. This is our first virtual salute, but it is the 14th consecutive year that we have come together to recognize the importance of gender diversity on the boards and in the executive suites of public companies. We have an exciting morning ahead, but first, I would like to thank the members of the club who have worked so hard to make this event happen and to shine a light on the ways that leadership has had to change during this past very challenging year. To the Corporate Salute Committee members led by Jane Puffer, I offer thanks from all of us. Next year, 2021, will be the Boston Club's 45th anniversary. And advancing women's leadership in the corporate sector, as well as in all others, has been a keystone of our existence and a driver of our growth. As a volunteer organization, we are fortunate to have members committed to being a force for change and to sharing the work of the Boston Club with all of you, even when that means doing it on Zoom. Over the years, we have placed well over 100 women on corporate boards and more than 250 on nonprofit boards. And while we are known region-wide for compiling the census, our unflagging commitment to placing more women on corporate boards is the force behind creating our census. While our gender diversity successes are ongoing, our success with women of color still lags behind. We are newly committed to changing the gender and the color of the boardroom starting now and in the years ahead. Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that women should be at the table when decisions are being made. I am proud to be a member of the Boston Club because in its most basic way, that's what we're about. And as I look ahead and see Vice President-elect Kamala Harris sitting in the room where it happens, it is a renewed motivation to continue doing the work that we do. As you logged into the meeting today, you saw the logos and names of the sponsors and partners who have made this event possible. And when we close today's session, I hope you will stay online long enough to review that list again. Every nonprofit looks to develop strong, lasting relationships with its partners and sponsors. And over our 44-year history, the Boston Club has been fortunate to work with more than 200 local, regional, and national organizations and individuals. Especially in this year, we want to thank them, particularly the 40 that are supporting today's event, 40. These are organizations and individuals that are proponents of good governance, diverse and inclusive leadership, and a successful economic future for us all. Support them, please, as they have supported our mission today. And join me in thanking all of them. And I would like to particularly acknowledge our supporting sponsors, Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, Raytheon Technologies, and the TJX companies. In addition to being leaders in their industry sectors, they are also outstanding examples of companies that recognize the value of diverse leadership. And special thanks to our contributing sponsors, American Tower, Biogen, Cummings Properties, Directors Circle, Eastern Bank, EY, iRobot, MKS, Sheehan Finney, State Street, and Waters Corporation. We very much appreciate your support. So in a few minutes, you'll hear about the ongoing work of the Boston Club's Corporate Board Committee from its chair, Hilary Potts, followed by the results of our annual corporate census, highlighting those companies that recognize the value women bring to the boardroom and executive suite. Census authors Pat Flynn and Tony Wolfman are well known within the corporate community for their incredible efforts in creating the census. The census has become a recognized tool for raising awareness of the value of gender diversity in corporate governance. And following the report on the census highlights, we will have the great opportunity to learn about the push and pull of change and how it's affecting leadership now from our stellar group of speakers and our esteemed moderator. During their conversation, we invite you to share any questions you may have and put them in the chat as you usually do. But before all that, we want to welcome a very, very special guest and a longtime supporter of the Boston Club to share some of his thoughts about leadership and the Boston Club with you this morning. And as you will see in a moment, he needs no introduction. Again, I want to thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you online or in person again at our many presentations and events throughout the year. So please enjoy the rest of today's program.
Hey everybody, this is Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker, and I want to start first of all by congratulating the Boston Club for all you do for so many here in the Commonwealth. I was actually a member of and then the chair of the Boston Club's Corporate Advisory Board back when I was CEO at Harvard Pilgrim, and in fact I recruited several members of then the Harvard Pilgrim Board of Directors from work we did with the Boston Club to find really terrific candidates and diversify our board of directors. The Boston Club has been a great organization to not just make opportunities like that available, where we benefited tremendously from the outreach and the network that the Boston Club made available to us. The folks we found, we never would have found on our own. But in addition to that, it creates this huge network and support system for women in business at every level who are looking to get better, be better, find another path, find a better path with respect to their own employment and their careers. And I can't think of a time when it would matter more than what we're dealing with now, these days, which of course is COVID-19. COVID-19 has challenged all of us in unimaginable ways over the course of the past 10 months. And the Boston Club is a resource for its members to learn from one another with respect to what can work, what can be done, how it can be dealt with, given the way the world is turned upside down, is a tremendous asset. I spend time, when I'm looking for somebody to talk to who's walking in my shoes, talking to other governors. And I know for a fact that the Boston Club for Women in Business has been a tremendous asset to other women in business who are looking for advice and guidance, and in some cases, just somebody they can share thoughts and ideas with. I do believe we'll all get through this. It will be and has been a very rugged ride for most. But I think one of the things a place like the Boston Club can do is to demonstrate to people that you're not in this alone. There's always somebody out there who's sharing the same kinds of circumstances and situations that you are and can commiserate with you about what the best path forward is to deal with whatever that particular issue of the day is. I know for me, if I didn't have other people I could talk to work through all the issues that we deal with, it would be very isolating and wildly depressing. So I salute the Boston Club. I think the Boston Club's a great organization. I loved having a chance to work with it back when I was in the dreaded private sector. And to everybody who's part of the Boston Club and part of this year's initiative, I just want to say how much I hope next year we can all get together physically once again and share stories, best practices, and the things that make the Boston Club and the City of Boston and the Commonwealth great. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Baker, for those kind words, your insights, and continued support. Good morning, everyone. I'm Hilary Potts. As Governor Baker noted, the Boston Club's Corporate Board Committee works to advance more women onto boards of public and for-profit companies, with an added focus on increasing women of color in the boardroom. We fulfill our mission through advocacy, education, and board placement. Today, I want to briefly talk about how that happens and how you can help. Most of the corporate board work is around involving identifying, connecting, and building relationships with CEOs, nominating committee members, and other key influencers in targeted public and private companies. While gender diversity, in fact, all types of diversity in business and the boardroom have become hot topics, there's still much work to do. How many women directors on a board are enough? We feel one token woman is not enough. Research confirms that the strongest contribution from women directors to governance, to policy, and to the bottom line happens when there are 3 or more women at the table. Advocacy is not our role alone. We ask you to join our efforts to shed light on this topic. If you're on a board, make sure searches for new directors and new executives focus on a diverse pools of candidates. If you're a shareholder, make it clear that you'll only support diverse slates of candidates. And if you're a business owner or executive, make sure that you're cultivating a diverse organization as well as partnering with vendors who support leadership diversity. If you are interested in standing with us to continue to advocate for women on boards, please contact the Boston Club and a member of the CBC will get back to you. Our second area of focus is on board education programming to help women learn more about and prepare for board service. The Boston Club hosts many board education programs. In addition, we partner with organizations such as NACD New England and Essex Partners to help women understand what does it take to be on a board, how to prepare, and how to get there. If you're interested in board service now or in the future, it's never too early to look into the process. We cover a variety of topics, including things like what's the difference between an executive resume and a board resume? What particular skills and experiences are boards looking for today? And what gaps do you need to fill in your career right now so that you can become qualified for a board? This year, we've held monthly board education sessions. Our final session this year is scheduled for November 30th, and the topic is director compensation. And we're already working on the whole slate of 2021 board education programs. So be sure to check out the Boston Club website for upcoming board education events, as well as a host of other interesting programs. The club puts on well over 40 plus events a year. We directly and indirectly influence board searches through advocacy, education, and placement. Our goal is to provide top-notch women candidates for board searches. Year to date, we've actively participated in well over 20 board searches across the US. If you're interested in finding qualified women candidates for your board, we're really interested in talking to you. The Boston Club cultivates a pipeline of qualified women executives, and we're always looking forward to strengthening that pipeline. So if you're a women executive or you know a woman looking for a board, we'd love to include you in our database. It's really easy. Boston Club members, just include your board qualifications and interest in your member profile. If you're not a Boston Club member, we accept your board bio or resume. Just send it to info@thebostonclub.com. As Governor Baker mentioned, you don't have to go it alone. If you aren't a member, consider joining the Boston Club to meet over 600 like-minded women executives and entrepreneurs. We continue to advance women into senior executive roles and into the boardroom. The Boston Club's annual corporate census highlights those companies recognized the value of women and diversity. And it also identifies where there's still a little bit of work to do. For 18 years, the Boston Club members have been the power behind this annual report. This year's authors, Pat Flynn and Tony Wolfman, are recognized experts in tracking the progress of Massachusetts public companies and recognizing trends and gaps that they highlight for us in each census. You'll receive a copy of the census shortly after the salute ends. If you don't, you can always find our census on our website. Thank you very much. We are so happy you could join us for this year's salute. And I'd like to welcome Pat Flynn to share her highlights and insights about the 2020 census.
Good morning. I'm Pat Flynn, Trustee Professor of Economics and Management at Bentley University, and one of the authors of the Boston Club Census of the Women Directors and Executive Officers of Massachusetts Public Companies. My co-authors are Tony Wolfman, who's the former chair of the Boston Club's Corporate Board Committee, and my Bentley colleague, Cynthia Clark, who's a professor of management. This is our 18th annual census report that tracks the gender composition of the board of directors and executive suites in the 100 largest public companies in Massachusetts. So I'm going to start with the good news so that we all have something to celebrate during this crazy period of time. For the first time, all 100 companies in the census have at least one woman on their board. Hooray! This is very exciting, especially since when we started in 2003, 50 of the 100 companies had all male boards, 50 of the 100. Second, also for the first time, there are no 00s. If you're not familiar with a 00, that's our infamous term used to flag companies that had no women directors and no women executive officers. So you can see this great chart showing that the 00s are at 0. This is great. The companies really didn't like being identified as a 00. And this was especially the case when Shirley Long highlighted them in stories in the Boston Globe. We sincerely hope that 00s has gone from our vocabulary and from the census reports. Okay, some additional positive results that we got. Women now hold 26.7% of the board seats in the census companies. This is the highest percentage to date. And I have to laugh. People sometimes say, why do you keep using decimal points? We've used decimal points because in some years, if we didn't, it would show no progress. So we needed to use the decimal points. But here you can see we have reached both in terms of the number and the percent, the highest levels that we've had since we started doing the census back in 2003. So that's very positive. Okay, also, 39 companies have at least 3 women directors, which is great. In this chart that you're going to see, looks a little busy, but it shows a lot of very positive trends. So for instance, the companies with 3 are identified with the red line, and you can see that taking pretty significant increase, as well as the yellow. Or maybe green, yellow or green line is also made significant progress. So quite a few of the census companies now have 2 women or 3 women on their board. This chart also shows the purple line that the companies with no women on their board has in fact disappeared. Okay, now women hold 125 of the executive officer positions. So we have a similar chart here for executive officers. And here you can see, again, we're at the highest number and the highest percentage we ever have been. In this case, unlike the one with the directors, you can see there was a few blips, but at least in the past few years it's turned around. So there've been increases both in number and percent for each year. Okay, and other piece of good news, 14 census companies have 3 or more women executive officers. So that's very positive. So when you listen to all this great news, the question is this the last year of the census? And I have to say it's tempting to say yes, but in fact, absolutely not. We still have a long way to go. And that's because of some additional information that I'm going to just highlight right now. It is also the reason why the title of this year's census report is, quote unquote, significant progress, but not for everyone. So some of the points that aren't so good. Number one, approximately 1/3 of the census companies have no women executive officers, none. That's 1/3 of the companies. And in terms of women of color, they are just 3.1% of the directors of the census companies and 2% of the executive officers. So those are pretty low percentages. In fact, over 3/4 of the census companies have no women of color directors, and 87% have no women of color who are executive officers. Also, I'd just like to point out, we regularly pick on the tech sector because of their statistics. But this year, again, the tech sector holds last place in both percentage of women in their boardrooms and percentage of women in their executive suites. And we have to say this outcome is not attributed to the lack of an adequate talent pool. In fact, in this year's census, six tech companies have 3 women on their board. So that's pretty exciting. Okay, in terms of our special analysis, so we do a special analysis every year. This won't surprise you that this year we focused on women of color. In 2004, when we started reporting the data on women of color who are directors, there were 9, just 9. And so here you can see we've got a couple of pie charts here for 2004 plus 2020. And you can see, it's really hard to see because the numbers are so small, that we went from 9 women of color in 2004, we actually had 28 this year. But because the numbers are so small, we're talking about going from a 1.1% increase up to a 3.1%. So we still have a long way to go there. And in 2008, we included information on women of color who are executive officers. So we have this comparable chart here with the pie charts for executive officers. And here again, you can see the numbers, 0.7% in 2008. And now it has increased. You can see from the chart, we went from 5 to 14 women of color who are executive officers, but the numbers are still so small, it went from 0.7% up to 2.0%. So there's another area where we have a long way to go. I would like to point out that, the leading institutional investors that include BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and have heard that they've reinforced the inclusion of race and ethnicity in their expectations for the companies that are in their portfolio, as well as for themselves. In addition, just this past month, a new coalition of institutional investors and advisors called the Diversity Disclosure Initiative is pressing companies in the Russell 3000 to voluntarily disclose their information on racial and ethnic composition of their boards. And I'm happy to say that several census companies, including Boston Scientific, HubSpot, TJX, and Vertex Pharmaceutical, have already disclosed some or all of the information on their racial and ethnic composition of their directors and of their workforce. And I couldn't talk about diversity without talking about California. So yes, it's California. And on September 30th of this year, you probably heard that California enacted legislation requiring all public companies that are headquartered in the state to have at least one person of color or one who identifies as gay, bisexual, or transgendered on their boards by the end of 2021. So we are hopeful that the momentum created by these companies, these organizations, and by the state of California will result in a significant increase in women of color in the boardrooms and in executive suites in Massachusetts companies. So I only have about a minute left. So in my concluding remark, I would just like to highlight upcoming opportunities for change in the census companies. Approximately 20% of the independent directors of this year's census companies are 70 years of age or older. And most boards now have a retirement age of 75. So this means that at least 125 board seats will become vacant in these companies over the next few years. So we encourage you to remind people that the Boston Club maintains a database of highly qualified potential women directors. We're always on the lookout for new additions to this database, including many of you who are in the audience today. And we are happy to work with boards and with business leaders in identifying a wide range of diverse candidates. And we do so free of charge. So let's take advantage of these upcoming board vacancies. In the meantime, let's celebrate the end of the all-male boards and the end of the 00s in the census companies. Hope to see you all in person next year.
I think the Boston Club's an opportunity for very busy senior women to be in a professional environment and meet other women with different backgrounds, diverse situations, and learn from them. And not only learn from them from a career standpoint, but make some friendships and relationships of women you would never have met.
The women who are members of the club reflect what you see actually out in the workplace today.
I can pretty much call anyone if I need advice about any matter related to my business. I can call anyone in the Boston Club and they will pick up the phone right away. And there's always someone who's been there, done that.
There was a company that was actually formed by 2 Boston Club members who had been introduced to each other by another Boston Club member. They hired a Boston Club member attorney to help them form their corporation and another Boston Club member to market their product for them. That is a real success story.
For me personally and professionally, they have probably been the greatest assets and supporters that I could ever have. And we are making sure that women's voices, which in turn means all voices, are being heard, and we are able to make a difference in the world in which we live, and of course in Boston.
And I think that the club is really helping to groom us and give people the opportunity to understand that although you're taking what you need to do for your family and for your position and for your own growth, you need to look at the big picture and make sure that you're reaching out and still learning skills, making relationships, and thinking about your next big adventure. And I am excited about continuing to be a member and have more experiences and more relationships in the future.
I'm Shirley Leung, and I'm a columnist with the Boston Globe. I knew we could do it. An end of the all-male board and 00 era. So congratulations to everyone watching and to the Boston Club. So this year, we're going to be hearing from Raytheon Technologies General Counsel Frank Jimenez, MIT lecturer and social justice leader Malia Lazu, and Boston Scientific CEO Mike Mahoney. The theme of this year's panel is the push and pull of leadership. What does leadership look like now, given the challenges of a pandemic and a racial reckoning? We're going to do things a little differently this year. First, we're going to hear from each panelist individually because each has a unique perspective and story to tell. Then we're going to bring all 3 panelists back together at the end for a conversation. If you want to ask a question, I think Nancy mentioned this earlier, please submit one through the Q&A function on Zoom. I think the chat function has been turned off. I've seen a couple questions come through, so keep them flowing. Anyways, first up is Frank. Is Frank here?
I'm here.
Hi, Frank. Here you are.
How are you?
I'm good. So Frank Jimenez is the general counsel at Raytheon Technologies. Prior to its merger with United Technologies in April, Frank had served as Raytheon's general counsel. And before heading into the private sector, Frank was the general counsel of the Navy. Good morning, Frank.
Good morning.
So you started the year probably thinking that Raytheon's merger with United Technologies would be your biggest challenge in 2020. So how did COVID disrupt your company, and what is the game plan to get back on track, especially when the forecast for air travels, it's not supposed to return to normal for many years to come?
Well, first I want to thank the Boston Club for giving me this opportunity to put on a blazer and to wear something other than shorts. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Yeah, to your question, if you told me in January, 3 months before the merger was scheduled to close, that the merger would actually be the least of our challenges for 2020, I don't think I would be here today because I would have gone into a catatonic state. As it turns out, the merger has gone relatively smoothly. We closed it in April, and it's been strange. We have a board of directors that has yet to meet in person 7 months after the merger. We have an executive leadership team that has yet to meet in person 7 months after the merger. But despite those challenges, the merger itself has gone relatively smoothly. We're busy bringing the two legacy companies together, harmonizing policies and processes and systems. And both sets of legacy employees have really enjoyed getting to know one another. And there's been no merger-related drama. All the drama has been not related to the merger, but it has come about due to what our CEO, Greg Hayes, refers to as the two pandemics. Of course, there's the COVID pandemic, but there's also the racial injustice pandemic that we're all grappling with as a society. With respect to the first one, which is your question, keep in mind that Raytheon Company was a defense technology company, and it merged with the two aerospace companies of United Technologies, Pratt & Whitney Engines and Collins Aerospace. And those two aerospace businesses' largest customers are the airlines and the airplane manufacturers, Airbus and Boeing. So on that side of the house, on the Pratt and Collins side of the house, it's been tough. Revenues are way down because air travel is way down. Unfortunately, we've had to take dramatic cost actions, including furloughs and layoffs, and that's been very, very hard to deal with. So that has been, the biggest challenge for us as a company.
So you mentioned the twin pandemic about the racial reckoning, and that's a great segue into my next question. I was hoping you could take us back to the last week of May. The George Floyd video had gone viral, protests erupted around the country. How did Raytheon Technologies address the Black Lives Matter movement?
So in some ways, there are parallels between the way we addressed the two pandemics. With the first pandemic, COVID, our primary focus was and still is on our employees and their safety and health, right? They matter as people more than the company matters as an entity. So for those who can't work from home, we've mandated mask wearing, we've de-densified, we've reconfigured spaces. We, do all kinds of cleaning, and our focus is on our employees as people. Same thing with the second pandemic. We're trying to connect with each and every person at Raytheon Technologies as an individual, not so much as an employee. They say that it's not polite to talk about religion and politics in polite company. But when it comes to these matters, it's not only polite, it's necessary to talk about these types of issues in order for employees to feel that they're a part of the company. So I've been very proud of our CEO and all of our leaders. From the very beginning, Greg Hayes has set the tone at the top through constant messages, both video and written, about how issues of racial justice, about inclusion, about the importance of diversity are central to our values. We want that to define who we are as a company. And we're also committed to making sure that we do everything in our power to ensure that this time will be different. There have been similar incidents in the past that have just seemed to go away, and we've kind of reverted to normal. But normal is not healthy. Normal is not good. The George Floyd killing has shown that to be the case. So we want to, want to keep our eyes on the ball because not only is it the right thing to do morally, it's the right thing to do for our company. Because the more we can recruit from all facets of society, talent from all corners of America, the better we'll be as a company. We're upping our game in terms of our representation goals, and we'll be announcing those soon. We want to be more diverse than we are today. We've conducted many listening sessions. 6 months after the killing, we're still doing listening sessions with our diverse employees. Greg Hayes himself, and then all of his direct reports and their teams have had moderated sessions learning about what, the lived experiences of others. We have focused not just on diversity, which is embracing and valuing difference, and inclusion, which is making sure everyone can bring their whole selves to work. We're also focusing on equity, which is treating people the way that they want to be treated. And although the problem may be most acute amongst our Black employees and in the Black population of society, we're also focusing on women, Hispanics, and Asians as well. We want to make sure that we mentor our diverse talent and reach down and bring them up and make sure that, as they are promoted up through the ranks of the company, that they have every opportunity that a non-diverse employee would have.
Mhm. One little quick follow-up. I know we're probably running out of time, but so I know Raytheon's had an incredible culture of diversity and inclusion. What was it like bringing United Technologies into the mix? I mean, did they have a similar culture, a history of that?
They did, and in some ways, Raytheon was maybe a little more advanced. In other ways, United Technologies was maybe a little more advanced. Before the merger, UTC had announced a goal of 50% women executives, I believe, by the year 2030. So the two companies were very similar in that regard. These are core to the values of both companies, and so in that way, along with many other ways, the merger was very natural.
That's great, Frank. Well, we're gonna transition to our next panelist. We'll see you later. Next is Malia Lazu. Do we see Malia yet? Here you are. Hi. So Malia is a longtime community organizer who decided to get a corporate job at Berkshire Bank. And she served as Chief Cultural and Experience Officer and later as its Boston Regional President. She is now a lecturer at MIT Sloan School of Management. So Malia, you were an unconventional hire at Berkshire Bank with your background as a community organizer, and you had never worked in corporate America. What did you learn about your 2.5 years working at Berkshire, first as a consultant and then in-house, and more importantly, did you figure out what is the best way to drive change? Is it protesting in the streets, or is it doing PowerPoints in the boardroom?
Thank you so much, and hi everyone. And I too want to celebrate the end of the all-male board. Glad to see it happen in my lifetime. So there we go. I'll for sure text my mother. I think that the question is the question. You think that you can push for change in boardrooms, and I think to a certain extent you can. But what I have found is that we need the streets. The reason why corporations are talking about this right now is because of an 8-minute and 46-second video of something that we were trying to get corporations to talk about 5 years ago, when there was the video of, Michael Brown's body laying in the street uncovered for hours. And so, this was a moment and people took to the streets and corporations responded. And so I think it's great, but I do think that ultimately power is and change is driven from the streets. And what you want is a board that recognizes that. You want a board that sees now is the time to change. Now is the time to lean in and to figure out how to work with folks to make the most of these moments. But let's be clear, I don't think boards or corporations would have been making these changes if it wasn't for the fact that we had such a horrific moment and very little government response.
So certainly the banking sector felt the impact of COVID, but it wasn't like aerospace. And later we'll hear from Mike Mahoney and at Boston Scientific. And it wasn't the same kind of dramatic drop in revenues that other sectors experienced. But instead, when I think of what happened to banking, I mean, they were almost like first responders to small business owners when the pandemic abruptly shut down the economy last spring. I mean, can you take us back to late March and April, and when you were at Berkshire, and how did the bank respond?
Yeah, and as a community organizer and as someone who understands how to make impactful and actual authentic change, the minute that the COVID crisis started and I found myself on the 38th floor, I felt very helpless. Change doesn't happen in institutions, right? Institutions respond to change. And so to be sitting in an institution felt very out of touch, and it felt like I was in a place where I was going to be very helpless. And I talked to our CEO then, Richard Murata, and I was quite upset, because I just felt that while there was so much going on, I didn't see where I, as a bank exec, was going to actually be able to get in and help people. And I want to shout out my CEO, Richard Murata, and proof of the type of outside the box thinking and that you can do if you're willing to trailblaze and not just be a torchbearer. And, he said, well, figure it out. Like, you organize from here then, if that's what you want to do. And that's why we came out with our COVID response package. We were the first company in Massachusetts to do so. We did it before Governor Baker. We were the first bank to respond to non-customer PPP loans and encouraged other banks to join us and take suit. So I think what it allowed me to do was actually show other banks what an exec looks like when an exec knows how to organize, and part of what I think my value add was in this company and really a model to look at is that I didn't spend 20 years building my career in banking. I spent 21 years building my career in change. And so I can go into a bank and help them learn how to actually apply these learnings. And, when they get trainings on the right words to use and role play and, this is how you be nice to people, all of that's great. But the rubber really hits the road when is it attached to your P&L? Is it attached to your valuations? Is your management being, are their KPIs tied to diversity? And if they don't get it right, does something happen? That lets us know that we're playing for real, right? And so I think it was very exciting to be able to be at a bank at a time of crisis, to be able to show what how we could really push the envelope and change work and develop products and services to help people. The last thing I'll say about that is that yesterday I received an award from the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. And
congratulations.
Thank you. Looking for congrats. And no, I'm kidding. But the reason why I bring it up is because one of the things that Shagun said was that in March, I was one of the people he talked to. The only person he talked to more was his mother. And that really touched me to, know that Shagun and I could sit down and for a month, we could figure out what Black businesses were going to need. And to be credited for the saving of BECMA's Black businesses is not only personally humbling, but it makes me very proud as an organizer to know that I went into the bank and in 2.5 years was able to make not only checkbox change, but actually save some of the composition of Boston's economy. And that I'm probably the most proud of at my time as an executive.
Yeah, when I look back at the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic, I think of the work at Berkshire and how, because of your role as a community organizer, a lot of small business owners, customers or not customers of Berkshire, knew to reach out to you and for help, because when we look back in late March, nobody knew what was going to happen. This is really unprecedented. So anyways, congratulations. And I'm glad that, I hadn't heard that story from Beckma and Shagun.
Yeah, I hadn't either until yesterday. And I was like, well, we were talking a lot in March,
I'm going to teach them about that next time. Anyways, I have one last question for you, Malia. I want to talk about Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. She's the first woman, the first Black, first Southeast Asian to hold that office. I mean, no matter what your politics are, what does her ascension to being a heartbeat away from the presidency mean for women, in particular women of color?
So representation matters. One of the reasons why I think Barack Obama was the first African-American president, and he's from Hawaii, is that Barack Obama grew up in a place where he was not a minority, where he saw elected officials. He actually thought that he believed he could be president. And people looking at Kamala Harris are going to think the same thing, whether you agree with her politics or not. And if this was X amount of years ago and it was Sarah Palin, I would have this same answer, which is to have a woman be one heartbeat away from what once was the most powerful position in the world, is inspiring. And I didn't know how exactly I was going to feel when it happened, but when I saw all the pictures of the little girls, watching her in that suit, I realized the importance of it. But more importantly, Joe and Kamala have a chance now to model white ally male behavior, right? And Joe can really show what it's like to be a white male ally and not just mansplain what your vice president said, or not block and tackle what your vice president needs to do, but make sure that she has the open path and open road that Vice President Biden had when he was president. So I'm really excited for women everywhere. I think we're one of the few countries, right, that in the free world that hasn't had a female leader. So I'm excited for that. And I'm excited for also men to learn how to respect women in power and to learn how to respond to that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Malia. Thank you for your thoughts and your insights. We're going to hear more from you. Next, we're going to hear from Mike Mahoney from the lovely city of Marlborough.
Right.
I think Mike's joining us. Hi, Mike.
Good morning, Julie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. So Mike is the CEO of Boston Scientific for nearly a decade. He is joining us from the headquarters in Marlborough. We were learning that he doesn't know much about the headquarters city, but he knows a lot about Boston Scientific campus, right?
I do. Campus isn't very crowded here, so it's easy to park right now.
So the pandemic has had a pretty dramatic impact on the medical devices industry because hospitals and hotspots, had to defer elective surgeries and procedures. I just remember in April, Boston Scientific was one of the first companies to really kind of show the world the dramatic impact of the pandemic on companies, on specifically life sciences companies. And you announced a temporary pay cut for thousands of employees because you expected a sharp drop off in revenue. Other companies may have gone straight to layoffs, but how and why did you decide we're going to do a pay cut strategy? And if you could also then follow, what has happened to the business since?
Sure. Well, good morning. First, before I jump in, that's the numbers that were presented today on the representation of women in the boards is fantastic momentum. It's great to see that progress over time, and all the numbers heading in the right trajectory as they should. So back in our business, we're med tech company. We're about 130 countries. So we saw the pandemic emerging first in Asia, and then kind of followed around the world. In our business, we typically think of whether we're going to grow, 4% in a bad year or maybe 9% in a really good year, and you're kind of dealing in those ranges and product innovation and portfolio and globalization. So then when the pandemic hit, we saw business drop 50%. which was dramatic when they shut down in many places elective procedures. And so, I won't talk about the financial treasury side, but we quickly saw, this is a serious problem overnight. And the issue was we knew the business eventually would be strong because people need life-saving devices and hospitals need to run and ERs and ICUs and procedures need to happen. So we know this is a temporary phase, but we just didn't know how long. And so given that we knew the business would eventually come back, albeit still not normal, that's for sure, we didn't want to wait and kind of pause too long and then end up firing a bunch of people and laying off a bunch of people. So what we did right away, at least the first phase, was basically we're all in this together attitude. And so our board of directors took significant pay cuts, our executive team, and we essentially asked our employees, or didn't ask, we moved to a 4-day work week, which is a 25% reduction in pay across the company in the US. And we simply did that because we said we want to preserve jobs as best we can. We know this will eventually end, but we need to also preserve the financial health of the company. And so we did that, and it really, we did it pretty quickly. We communicated it very well. We had lots of town halls, lots of questions about it. And we let the employees know that it likely could be 6 months or it could be a year. And so we'd set an expectation that's going to be a while. The other thing that was really encouraging to me, I think it shows the strong culture of the company and the we're in it together mentality. In Europe, you can't impose a 4-day work. You cannot impose a 4-day work week. The laws all are country driven. And we actually had 80% of our employees volunteer to take a 25% pay cut in Europe. Wow. And in Asia.
Wow.
And in Asia, you can't do it. And so in the US, you can actually make this happen, and there's different state laws. But it was really a great feeling of kind of corporate togetherness, if you will, on that other countries and regions were willing to do this to preserve the health of the company for the long term. So we did that, and I tripled the gray hair count in my head during those times. Since then, the business has gotten better. Quite a bit better in third quarter, but still far from normal. And so we ended up getting rid of the pay reduction about 100 days after we implemented it. And we realized that the business was getting healthier. We could save money in other areas through massive cuts in travel and meetings and so forth. That greatly offset some of that pay. So we did it for about 100 days and then stopped it. And so now our employees are back to the normal, certainly not normal work in terms of location, but normal pay and benefits and so forth. So it was an interesting experience, but I think the kind of we're in it together approach that the employees took was really pretty meaningful for us.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. 100 days for a voluntary pay cut and not working less. So that's pretty incredible. I want to also talk.
We tried to say work 4 days a week, but
right.
That wasn't the case in many places.
Right. So I want you to take us back to the last week of May when the George Floyd video had gone viral. Now, Floyd's killing in police custody took place in Minneapolis, and Boston Scientific has a large presence in Minnesota. And I think Boston Scientific, I was looking back, I think it was only 3 days or maybe even 2 days afterwards, after the video had gone viral. You were one of the first major companies to issue a statement about his death. And companies, I think Frank talked about this earlier, companies have typically stayed silent on racial incidents. But how did you sense at Boston Scientific, as the head of Boston Scientific, that this might be a big moment and that the company needed to say something?
Sure. We have almost 10,000 employees in Minnesota, so we actually have more employees there than we do in Mass. They want to change the name to Minnesota Scientific, but we're not going to do that. And so that was obviously a big day for the world. Tragic for sure, but also I think massively helpful long term. And so at Boston, we have those 10,000 employees there. Many of those employees live in the neighborhood where the incidences occurred, and then the protesting occurred. So our employees were scared. They were impacted directly. They knew people. And so it kind of brought it to life even more so for us, given the density of employees that we have there. And like every company is on their own journey in terms of how critical diversity and inclusion is. And this, I would say, it's always been very important to us and to myself. And we have lots of employee resource groups. We have over 10,000 employees in our employee resource groups. And so when that event happened, we basically said, what's in line with our values? Our values is to support diversity and inclusion and to stand against racism and injustice. And so we talked about it with the leadership team that day, and we said we're not going to wait for a bunch of other letters from other CEOs and companies 2 weeks from now and kind of join the pile. We wanted to proactively state our position so our employees knew right off the bat that we don't stand for this behavior. We're with them, and we don't believe in this. We know there's racism challenges. There's lots of unconscious bias. There's lots of issues, and that we recognize that. And in Boston, we don't stand for it, and we're trying to get better as a company. So it was important for us to tell our employees that right away. And then it kind of leaked out publicly, which we're happy about. But it was important for us to declare quickly and not wait to our employees that we back up what we talk about. And then I think.
I was going to say, you've done you've done town halls. I mean, there's more work that you've been doing. I mean, you are already doing a lot other work, but the letter, I mean, you've built off that letter, right?
Yeah, I think, and some of the comments that were made earlier, I think it spurred, depending on where you are in the journey, it spurred a lot of great activities. And you heard a lot about courageous conversations and connecting with employees at a deeper level. And that happens, that really spurred all those activities to take place. And those are all very helpful, and they continue to be very helpful. But also what we quickly saw after that is they're a bit exhausting. To lean on our Black employees every day to share their experiences every day is very helpful. But then it quickly turned into, but what are we actually going to do about it other than the conversations all the time? And that's where our Black community in particular is gaining a bit frustrated with it. And so we've since then implemented more things, and we have diversity and inclusion specific metrics that we publish. And this year we're taking that to another level. We're actually having 15% of our annual bonus will be tied to diversity and inclusion specific goals beyond sales and EPS. So we've done a lot internally on unconscious bias training. It's funny when we said, yeah, well, we have all this training. And then our employees kind of looked at it and said, yeah, this is great, like in 1980s. So it needs to be completely refreshed, which we've done. So we've invested a lot in modernizing our unconscious bias training. Our EC members are all chairs of an employee resource group. We're very active. So we've done a lot of things internally. Other thing that we've done is assessment of what, if you really dig into it, why don't our Black employees and also you could say Hispanic employees, why aren't they promoted as often? So we did an analysis on this, and it was clear that despite having interview processes and so forth, it's less likely that our Black employees would be promoted. So we actually did a very deep analysis on that and tried to figure out why. And so we really are putting more and more efforts, besides unconscious bias training, on the hiring progression and other internal capabilities, as well as the metrics on D&I and our bonus pay. And then we've also done quite a bit of work externally, involved in various CEO councils, making contributions. So the good news about George Floyd is wherever a company is on their journey, I think it put a fire under it, and we're certainly have a long way to go, but it's an important area for us.
Well, thank you, Mike, for those thoughts. We're going to bring back all three panelists. Let's see if this works out technologically. Oh, there you go. This is great. Welcome back, Frank and Malia. So again, I just want to remind people, if you have questions, send them through the Q&A. I've got a handful of questions already. I'd love to, toss in some more so it's not all my questions. So all three of you, I just wanted to ask a question about just leadership in general. I was just wondering, what has been the biggest lesson you've learned in managing during an all-encompassing pandemic, one that just doesn't affect business, but all aspects of life? What has been the most effective strategy?
So I'll go ahead and start. Last week, I did a global town hall for my function with 2,000 people. And I sounded like a broken record on one theme, and I did that on purpose. I kept saying over and over again, and I'm going to keep saying it, as long as I'm at this company, as long as this pandemic continues, that, our employees are more important than the company, and that they need to put their own health and welfare and well-being psychologically and emotionally as the top priority. So I encourage them not to work too hard, to take their time off, to do something every day that's fun and enjoyable, to raise their hands if they're struggling. I gave them my email address, and it said, if you need to reach out to me, please do, but reach out to your manager, reach out to your HR partner. And then I encouraged all our managers to adopt that same attitude with their team members, to, give them space and to make sure that they're putting themselves first, because this is not a sprint, it's a long race, and you have to pace yourself. And so that message has been, I think, at the forefront of my leadership in this pandemic.
Are we just doing popcorn, Shirley? Okay, I was like, are you gonna call on us?
No.
So, I agree with Frank. I think communication. We had Richard on, and continued to talk to folks. Actually, one of our branches got caught up in the uprising, and we wanted to make sure that that Berkshire Bank understood that our take on this was that this is a natural response, from a group of people who have been systematically oppressed for 400 years, and that this was not violence, right? But that this was the mere breaking of windows. And that messaging and the open communication was really, really key. The other thing that we did is we hired white ally consultants. And that might seem strange, but white people need a place to talk about their stuff. And as Mike was saying, that it can't be Black people's responsibility all the time to, we pay enough of a Black tax and now have to be your therapist becomes a little lot. It becomes a lot. So, hiring white ally consultants who can help people who might be saying like, well, why are they responding violently? Well, why is this happening? To really give white people a space to talk with white people around this, I think is, you asked about leadership, and I think it's like that's the kind of leadership that I think is important during times of crisis. Not that you are the only leader and that everyone comes through you, but that as a leader, you give your team what you need and what they need and what they need, and if one thing as a woman of color, what I know is that I don't know the white experience. It seems lovely, but I don't know it. And so I had to bring in folks who did understand the white experience to help white folks work through this moment. And I just think that when it comes to leadership and leadership in a time of crisis and change, if you are not humble and self-reflective, you are going to fail your company.
Great. Maybe just to add on a couple things. The comment that Frank's mentioned, this is unfortunately a marathon, not a sprint. We've all realized that. And I think the couple leadership lessons that maybe aren't new, but maybe just enhanced is this just candid communication. And typically the communication is very clear because there's specific plans in place. But I think communicating with employees that we're absolutely doing our best, we're putting their safety and their lives first. And we're also obviously doing everything to drive the company and support the cause of customers. But with that, having the agility to modify our game plan. We talked about the 25% pay cut and then ending that. Building, creating many more capabilities in HR on wellness and on mental health and depression. And so creating new capabilities and flexing our services in different ways beyond our financial planning and financial scenarios to support our internal employees, as well as flexing new muscles with our customers. We've really doubled down on digital capabilities and servicing our customers remotely through remote training and physician education. So I think the notion of communicating constantly communicating more frequently with our employees and letting them know we're doing our very best and we want to be agile. We're going to get a few things wrong along the way, and being able to pivot very quickly to create new capabilities internally or with our customers. So I think the pandemic has helped the agility of the company because we've had to react more quickly to unique circumstances.
Great. I'm going to ask another question, and then I'm going to segue into Q&A from the audience. And I've got a bunch of really great questions already. So I was hoping we could talk a little bit about this she session. And that's about how women have accounted for the majority of net job cuts during the COVID crisis, reversing a decade of job gains since the end of the Great Recession. In September, 4 times more women than men dropped out of the labor force, and in large part because they became primary caregivers as many public schools went remote or hybrid learning. And so how concerned are you about women falling behind in the workforce, especially on a day when we've heard they've been making great gains in the boardroom? And what can be done to make sure women stay on track and get back on track?
Oh, I'm going to go first as a woman. So, this is something that's been heartbreaking to me because I've seen it anecdotally. I'm blessed to be an auntie, but have chosen to not be a mother or a wife. It was just roles that never really felt comfortable to me. And watching what happened during the pandemic and watching girlfriends that I went to college with, that I watched start businesses, that I've watched them do their careers, immediately, there was no question that they were going to be the primary caregiver, right? Now that this was all said and done. And that is a scary thing for us to think about, because that actually, there's nothing corporations can do about that, right? I'm not sitting there when you and your partner are talking about how are we going to respond to this moment, right? The company isn't sitting there being like, okay, maybe we can give her a raise so she can make as much as the man, right? Like, we're not a part of those negotiations. And this gets to the ultimate question. And, all the work that corporations do, I think, are really to help change this. And that's America's culture, right? And as Peter Drucker reminds us, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And yet we have spent $8 billion on diversity and inclusion strategy, right? We need to actually change the culture. And right now, the culture in America is that women stay home, women raise children, women are the primary caregivers. And so when another crisis moment happens that keeps kids in school or, takes kids out of school, that has us needing to be more at home, we're going to see women make those choices. And so, I think it's something that we as corporations or people in corporate America, let's keep a light on for them, right? So that they can come back and that they can jump into their positions. But let's also understand that we come from a country where if a parent needs to stay home, it's most likely going to be the mother. And that's about America's culture and how we've acculturated women and our marriages and our partnerships more than anything that corporate America has done.
There's actually a net positive, and that's the silver lining, but it's in the future, right? What the pandemic has taught us is that there's ample room for much more virtual working arrangements than in the past. And so once the pandemic is over, I actually think, the Office of the Future will be a net positive for caregivers because it allows more flexibility in their personal schedules. But right now, during the pandemic, when many of our employees' children can't go to school, we're very concerned. And we've heard from a lot of our employee caregivers. It's not just children, obviously, it's also parents, elderly parents, et cetera. So we have really tried to emphasize the importance of flexibility, flexible working arrangements, part-time working arrangements, different schedules. We're really trying to drive that message home to our managers to give their employees, room to deal with all this. And we've enhanced our dependent care assistance programs, our employee assistance programs, and to Malia's point, in terms of returning to the workforce, we have a re-empowerment program that helps people re-entering the workforce, dip their toes back into the water and gives them special assistance to re-enter the workforce. But it's a really big issue right now.
Yeah, sure. I don't have much to add on to that, what Frank said. We're trying to, it's all about, for us now, is we know the value of the employees is offer as much flexibility as we can. Most are working from home. We offer sabbaticals, part-time. We know this will end, so we're trying to be as flexible as possible with people's schedules during the pandemic. But even though, despite that flexibility, we do see a dropout rate. So we're trying to help with backup childcare resources, wellness sites, flexibility, and try to hold on to that those assets and those great leaders as much as we possibly can. The only thing we can do, I think, right now is offer as much flexibility. I think one of the challenges is getting that message deep in the organization. Oftentimes you hear about this frozen middle, and it's having our supervisors and managers know that they need to provide that flexibility to their employees. Sometimes the executive teams get it, but getting that message deep in the organization sometimes is more difficult. So we try to spend more time there. I also do agree with Frank. I think if we can look forward, there will be benefits here. We will have a much more flexible, not 100%, but much more flexible work environment, which will help recruit talent. I think it'll help recruit Black talent from other regions of the country that we typically don't recruit from, and will also offer more flexibility for men and women. But right now, it is a challenge.
I'm going to start some questions from the audience. Here's one for each of the panelists. What do you think are effective and practical ways to increase the number of women of color on boards or in executive leadership positions?
So what we did is we made it a priority. So we made it a priority to find talented African American women. And Ellen Zane, she may be here. She's a director on our board, and we have recruited two fantastic. Well, actually, one new recruitment, Donna James. She's a fantastic board director. Now she's, I think, fully boarded out on more boards now. But we just made it a focused priority, just like we do with our D&I goals. And then we quickly saw, besides looking for great talent, the excellent added value they bring to the board. So I think when you make it a focus, then just like you would with any business plan, you find great talent, and you're certainly not compromising. You're bringing in great leaders, and you realize that. Also in the leaders, we had a woman named Megan Scanlon. She runs one of our divisions, a urology, and we put her in the job. We're like, oh, this is going to be a big step for her. And just yesterday during a business review, she now has the most diverse team in the company. So she recruited the most diverse team. And so what we see when we, it has a compounding impact when you bring in those diverse leaders, your networking, pooling to other diverse leaders amplifies.
So, Mike's right. Companies need to make it a focus. Companies like Boston Scientific and Raytheon Technologies don't necessarily need to be prodded, but a lot of companies do need to be prodded. So to your question, Shirley, the thing to do is to shine a light on it. And that's what the Boston Club does right, by shining a light on the lack of diversity amongst directors and officers, and not letting companies get away with it not being an issue of discussion. And once the light is shined on it, you'll find, as the Boston Club does, that companies step up. So the most important thing is to make it an issue, and I applaud the Boston Club for doing that.
And I will just add, I think what the gentleman said here were great, is to give yourself a space to get it wrong, give yourself generosity of interpretation. We've been doing this for 400 years. It's going to take us a while to actually get some to get equitable. So don't think you're going to boil the ocean in a day.
Outreach also is critical, right? Outreach, both at the director and officer level, to non-traditional channels of hiring and appointing. Not just relying on friends and family and traditional networks, but that outreach is critical.
I'm glad that Frank said that, because that leads me to something that I want to say. If you guys are if companies want to try this, I think that's really, really great. But know your culture is going to change, right? Know that when you bring women in, that they build community differently. And so don't want diversity, but then want your culture to feel like the bro culture that it's always been. And so I guess that would be the second thing I would offer up, is to know that your company will change, and that it will change for the better.
We have a lot of questions about D&I, and one specifically as a follow-up to Mike, your comment about setting a new goal. Is it 15% of your bonus is tied to D&I? Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's our recommendation in 2021.
Right.
So that's the plan.
The recommendation. And so I guess the question from the audience is, how did you come up with that number? How did you come up with that metrics? Why that number, and how did you get to that place?
Well, technically our board hasn't approved it yet, so that's a recommendation for next week. But so I think it'll likely go in that direction. And so, like any company, our annual bonus, like most companies, was 50% of sales and 50% of earnings per share. Is kind of the metrics that form our annual bonus. You get a base salary and annual bonus. So some companies alter those parameters on what the annual bonus is. And so we have some discretion as to what the composition is. So we've worked with our compensation consultants, and we benchmarked some companies that we thought were leading edge in that area. And just like we do with diversity and inclusion goals, we felt like putting a bonus compensation metric behind it is meaningful. Now, we didn't want to make it 50% because we want to ensure that we run the business, but we do know that a more diverse culture creates greater innovation and greater performance. So it is in line with a public company goal of creating shareholder value, because we do think diversity creates a stronger company. And so we felt like putting just that 50% number is a meaningful enough number to try it, and to ensure that we're kind of walking the talk with our employees, that our annual bonus is tied to it. It also drives, anytime you measure something, it drives behavior change on strategies to drive diversity and inclusion, talent that we're trying to seek, promotions. And so I think it just, it sets the right tone for strategy and goals, and we think it's the right level that makes sense.
So Mike, like you, I don't want to get out in front of our board, but you can tell your board that our board will be considering something quite similar at its meeting next month.
All right. Sure.
And then, can I add, I want to report on that, so let me know what happens. Malia,
we did something similar internally, and I think whatever number you pick, make sure you're supporting the staff in reaching that number. Like for our sales guys, for them to all of a sudden shift and try to get their goals when they don't know any Black people. We're like, well, now you have to go meet Black people, build relationships, and sell them mortgages, right? Like it's a lot to do. And so finding a way to support the community, your staff that might not have networks into diverse communities or things like that is really key so that people can get excited about these goals. The first event that we did for Black and Brown people was a Martha's Vineyard event that we did with Valerie Jarrett. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted to show that the Black community was absolutely bankable, and that there is, there's even an aspect of wealth management that we can look into when we're looking into the Black communities. So you really want to help because implicit bias sits in every employee. And so you really want to help your employees understand how they navigate through these diversity goals so they don't just get discouraged to be like, oh, I don't know any Black people, or oh, I don't know any women. The last thing I will say is that when Europe demanded that all boards be 50% women, every man put their wife on the board to get it to be 50%. So also, you can set goals and as Mark Twain said, there's lies, damn lies, and then there's statistics, right? You want to make sure that your quantifiable metric is actually measuring change and not just, again, getting you numbers.
All right, great. I have a, this might be my favorite question, whoever wrote this one. It's anyways, executive women are often facing necessity to adapt to organizations, executive culture, which is shaped by men. It values long hours, assertiveness, golf, whiskey, cigar clubs. What could be done to make executive culture more female friendly?
I mean, I don't know. I take a little bit of exception to that. I think the industry's changed quite a bit. We're certainly not perfect, but I think at least the companies I interact with quite a bit different than cigar smoking, bourbon, and golf all the time. I think it's changed a lot in my career. If I think back when I started when I was 25, it very much was that, and it certainly we have room to grow. But I think it just like the numbers you showed, I think culturally within companies, it's actually improved significantly, at least in my working career, the companies that I've been part of. And I think the way you modify it is representation of who's at your table. And I think that's where you see the change of behaviors, some things that Malia was talking about. The other thing is where unconscious bias training helps, even if it's dated. You realize that you do have inherent bias. And so when you walk into the meeting on Monday morning and you want to talk to your CFO about the Patriots, Celtics, and Red Sox every time, and it's realizing what kind of conversations you're having. With the LGBTQ community, sometimes there's frustration when everything's about family and kids right away. So I think the culture gets better with representation, but I also think awareness of the diversity of the room. And not saying you want to just have sterile conversation all the time, but leaders, I think you'll learn more each year on this journey, whether it be the LGBTQ community, the Black community, the women in the room. And I think companies are going in the right direction, quite frankly.
Well, as a native Floridian and as a Massachusetts transplant for only 6 years, I've learned, to my chagrin, that some of the biggest Patriots fans at Raytheon Technologies are actually women. Shout out to Judy Durkin, who's on this call and who's our financial planning and analysis lead. But Mike is right. I think the key here is self-awareness, right? Continually asking yourself, are the things that I'm saying and the questions that I'm asking the same things I would ask if this person was a woman and not a man? Are the things that I'm doing the same things that I would be doing if I was surrounded by women right now instead of men? And that self-awareness takes, a lot of work, a lot of effort, takes time, and it takes help. So women can, help make men more self-aware by calling these things out.
Amen. And I also will agree. I mean, I think that the industry has changed, right? Like, I have found that I haven't had to sip a lot of bourbon or smoke any cigars, but maybe that's because I'm a woman of color and no one's fighting me. No, I'm kidding. I do think that there is a different generation of man coming up, right? And that they are a little better than their forefathers, or, my grandfather who forbid my grandmother to get a job, right? Because he would provide, we moved a little bit from that. And I think that's exciting. I want to talk about two things. The first is this project around, and this term, conscious masculinity. And there's this project called A Better Man Project. And the whole idea was cisgendered straight men who were, who self-identified as such, were invited to come in to figure out, what does conscious masculinity look like? Gibran Rivera leads this program, and I would just recommend even women look it up, because it's so powerful to hear how men are talking today about how to shift their, their own posturing from this toxic masculinity to conscious masculinity. And the second thing I would say is that I think it's also very important that we as women have agency and that we hold our place. And, I know in different rooms that I'm in, I have no problem not playing golf, not smoking a cigar, not drinking bourbon, and still walking in and asking for what I need in a project. And I think we often subconsciously, our own implicit bias has us playing a different role. And it's not that you have to be assertive or aggressive, but it's just that you don't have to conform in order to get ahead. And I know that may seem counterintuitive, and it's like, oh yeah, well, but I really think that what I have seen, and some of the most successful women I have seen, were women who knew their power and knew their agency and knew that they had a true value add to bring to this all male management team, and that did look different, and that there was something in that divine feminine power that they had to offer. And so, we offer it openly, not with shame, not that it should have shoulder pads attached to it, and not that it should come with some dad joke, right? But that it comes the way we present it, and that if we're good at what we do, that'll be seen. And I think most men give us a chance to do that.
Great. We have time. We have one more minute left. So I'm going to consider this a lightning round. If you could answer this question in one sentence or even a phrase. But the last question from the audience is, what do you actually want to achieve in the area of diversity and inclusion? What real outcomes do you want to see within your organization? Maybe you could summarize it in a sentence or a phrase, or paint a picture.
I would say vibrancy and empowerment, where everyone not only belongs, but feels like they belong, and that we can attract the best and brightest from every corner of America and the world.
I think it looks like ending white privilege and ending white fragility.
Yeah, I don't have a one word for it. I just saw it yesterday with this one group that this woman president, Megan Scanlon, runs this division, and there was a group of black leaders, women leaders, men leaders, and global around the world, and it was super cool because it was a mixed stew, and their business is performing extremely well. And so, I don't know, it's mixed stew is not a good way to end it, but it was fantastic to see.
Mixed stew is yummy. I love the idea of ending it with, and it's all chunks of yumminess coming together to feed the masses.
All right, so on that note, a mixed stew on a cold, rainy New England day is a perfect ending for this panel, I guess. So thank you, Frank, Malia, and Mike. I'm going to hand the virtual podium to Boston Club Chair Jane Puffer, who will give us closing remarks.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jane Puffer, Chair of the Corporate Salute Committee. As you leave today, I hope you will consider the remarks that were made by our speakers this morning. Consider how your company will adapt to the challenges we have seen over the past few months. Will you lead your organization differently? After hearing the panel, I took away some main takeaways that you should consider. Number one, progress has been made. There are 0 zeros on the census report. All the top 100 New England companies have women on their boards, but there's still room for improvement. There is a lack of women of color on the boards. Number two, we heard about lessons learned in managing through the pandemic, racial injustice, and the impact of Black Lives Matter. It was interesting that it's not only business, but what is the impact on all aspects of life. Caring about employees was a key message. Number three, what are companies doing about diversity, equity, and inclusion? What works? What has been effective? One keynote was that tying bonus to DEI goals was a start, showing metrics, and having unconscious bias training. Number four, companies are seriously taking the she session into their planning and how to address women falling behind in the workplace. Remember, these women are building a pipeline of women leaders in the future, and this is important. In closing, I want to thank our speakers, Shirley, Malia, Frank, and Mike, for a wonderful conversation about their experiences and the future of leadership. I want to thank our sponsors. Without their generous support, this event would not be possible. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Special recognition and thanks go to Boston Club members Tony Wolfman and Pat Flynn for their work on the 2020 census. They have spent many hours to research and consolidate this year's census report. I also want to recognize our Corporate Salute Committee, who did an excellent job to bring this event to you this morning. Finally, I want to thank all of you for attending our event this morning. I hope you will join us next year for the 2021 Corporate Salute. For more information on the Boston Club, you can reach us on our website or through our social media. Thank you, and we'll see you next year.